Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Julie Rose, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Driving Cultural Change Through Training. Our presenters today are Melissa Asher, who is the Director of Training and Recruitment with CPS HR Consulting, Rob Watson, the CEO and President of Resolution, and Andy Dobush, who is the Vice President at Resolution. Rob and Andy have partnered with CPS HR Consulting for 4 years on the Resolution program. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few pieces of information about the webinar. To avoid interruptions to the presentation, all attendees are in listen-only mode. You can still ask questions using the Q&A box in the webinar dashboard, and we'll make every effort to address your questions at the end of the presentation as time allows. Today's presentation is available on the CPS HR Consulting website. We'll also forward a link to all of today's attendees once the recording is available for viewing. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Melissa, Rob, and Andy.
Thank you, Julie, and welcome, Rob and Andy. Delighted to have you both with me today for this presentation on driving cultural change through training. We've had a tremendous amount of interest in this topic, so we're just going to dive right in. We've got a lot of content today. I wanted to share a bit of our agenda. Where are we taking you with us on this journey today? And we're going to start with some research behind behavioral change and how that can apply and best be used with your training programs. We're going to explore 4 barriers, and they're listed on your screen: conceptual, behavioral, motivational, attentional. But more to the point, we're going to talk about some solutions around those particular barriers to help people acquire skills. Periodically, we're going to refer to the Resolution Skills program, and we're going to do that because we have years and years, and Rob and Andy, we won't do the math, but suffice it to started in their younger years, much experience around applying the methods we're going to be talking about to drive change within an organization using these particular methods in a very extensive training program. So we hope by the end of this that you can pick up some of these ideas and hopefully incorporate them into maybe some of the things that you are doing within your organization, as well as just learning about what, through our hard-won wisdom, what is most successful when you're trying to get people to change behavior. So let's start with how easy this is. And we hope this picture gives you a sense of it. I felt like we were kind of going back to the Stone Ages here, but this picture, I think, really illustrates what we're thinking. You know, making and sustaining behavioral change, that's hard to say, is hard, even when it's in our own best interest. So this poor fellow who's too busy because he's got a square wheel can't even entertain this change of going to a round wheel. And this is kind of an older example, but even think about losing weight or quitting smoking, right? So my husband and I joke about dieting all the time because we've tried pretty much everything, and then we always end up laughing and staring at each other and saying, gosh, I guess it comes down to eating less and exercising more, which sounds so simple, but yet in practice, it's just so hard to do. And I'm talking about things that we might want to change. What about the things that we're not so sure about that if we want to make a change? So many work changes, you kind of feel like that. They fall into that category where we may not quite understand the change. We might question the motive for a change. It's hard to understand why the way we've been doing it hasn't been working. Does that mean I've been doing it wrong? All of these kind of emotions and ideas roll around in our head, making it difficult for us to get on board or even entertain doing something differently. So it's only natural that we put up a fair amount of resistance. So here's a list of about 50 reasons why not to change. You might have heard a few of these, and I know that this is just really the tip of the iceberg. When we think about the workplace and when we think about all of the changes that are before us and the complexities of the world, I think, that we live in today, where change is becoming more and more important because the world is just moving a lot faster. The complexity of what we're doing has increased. I think there's a growing expectation for better, faster, more seamless service within the public sector. All of those things put pressure on us as an organization to try to operate more effectively. But a lot of the operating more effectively really is doing things differently. And I like to say it that way instead of just change. We have to change. We need to start doing things differently so that we're more effective in the way that we work with each other, the way that we deliver our services and our products to our customers, you know, the way that we fulfill our mission in essence. So that's what we really want to focus in today. You know, how do we get our employees to embrace some new ways of working together? And how can we use training to do that, to drive and then sustain those changes?
Okay, so when we're talking about culture, we're talking about behavior. We're talking about behaviors that are expected in the organization. That's what makes up the culture. And if we want change, then we need behavior change. Now, there was a study that was done some years back at Stanford University. It was a 4-year study. And what they were trying to determine is what's the long-term behavior change as a result of the programs that were on the market at the time. Now, they had a theory going in because behavior modeling and using video was getting to be very popular at the time. And so they had a theory that the programs that relied on video to actually demonstrate the principles or skills were going to lead to a longer lasting change than those that relied on lectures and discussions and the like. That was their theory. And they were studying organizations, their change efforts that were all across the country, East Coast, West Coast, it was across the country. And at the end of the year and a half, they had a mountain of data that they were going through. And they came to what, for them, maybe not for you folks that are out there, but for them, it was the shocking conclusion that the average change was no change at all. No change at all. Now, this was measured 6 months later, so that's what they were looking for. They couldn't find any. So there were a number of people that were ready to go and write up articles right there that basically was saying, you know, leadership training a sham or that kind of thing.
My goodness.
And they thought, and some of the cooler heads prevailed, said, you know what, we might want to be in the business someday. Maybe we ought to put our efforts more in terms of what's getting in the way of the change and what can we do to overcome it. So now this initial year and a half of the 4-year study, the initial year and a half was trying to, it was just the organizational behavior department. But after the year and a half, then they reached out to the psychology department and the business department and others and made it a multidisciplinary effort to try to determine what's getting in the way and what can we do to overcome, now, Andy, in a few minutes, is going to be getting into the barriers that were identified, or the methodology that they were using to organize the barriers, and getting into the skills themselves. But before we get into that, it would be good to look at an overall principle that was acquired there. And that is, here's a way of looking at it. Now, this model that I'm showing you right now didn't come out of the Stanford folks, but it's a way of explaining probably their most important finding. So think of when you might have become a supervisor for the first time. What were the skills that you needed when you were first a supervisor? Well, you needed to have the technical skills. You needed to understand, you needed to be able to teach people what they were expected to do. And so you needed to know yourself. So you needed to have those technical skills, right? You also needed the human interaction skills, meaning that if somebody is doing it right, what do you do? What do you say to people so that they're prompted to continue to do it right? How do you talk with people when they're not doing it right? How do you get that turned around so that they are doing it right? How do you set expectations in the first place with people? How do you make sure there's good, clear agreements at the end of discussions? Those kinds of things. Those are the human interaction skills. And finally, there are conceptual skills. Those are like big picture skills, like strategic planning, succession planning, those kinds of things that executives are spending most of their time doing. But at the supervisory level, not so critical. Now you move up into middle management, and what are the mix of skills that are needed there? Well, the technical skills take on less importance because oftentimes into middle management, a lot of the things that are being done at the work level are not areas that you have that much expertise on. You might have a lot of expertise, but you might not. But but the conceptual skills, those are the ones that take on more importance until you get into top management. And that's where it's kind of reversed from the supervisors. The technical skills are much less important, but the conceptual skills are critical. What's in common with all three levels? What's in common is the need for the good, effective human interaction skills. Now, as I say, this didn't come out of the Stanford study, but it explains one of the major findings is that one of the things that they found is that what most organizations do, and still do to this day, is they oftentimes will bring in one training program for the supervisors. And they'll oftentimes bring in another program for middle managers, and top managers are more often than not left out completely. What the Stanford researchers found is that while that makes sense in terms of there are different mixes of skills that are needed, so you would think, yeah, you need different programs. But when it came to the human interaction skills, because different programs have different underlying theory bases and different terminologies and all that, that tended, around the human skills arena, that tended to disperse the organization. So the Stanford folks said, if you want to see a change in your culture from top to bottom, what you want to do is bring in a common vocabulary, a common methodology, have the CEO teach the top managers, have the top managers teach the middle managers, and have the middle managers teach the supervisors. And that's how you get the organization to bind together around a common set of how in this organization do we bring up problems? How in this organization do we make sure that people get the recognition that they should have? How in this organization do we set expectations, make clear agreements, etc.?
I just love this diagram and how it so clearly shows that human skill just cuts across all equally. Mm-hmm. It's just such a great visual.
Because we're all humans.
Right. And we're using it in any job, in any level in an organization, we are using those human interaction skills. And this just illustrates that so well. All right, so we primed the pump here a little bit to kind of get you thinking about kind of this research and some of the findings and what Rob has just talked about in terms of skills needed. So before we dive into those barriers and some solutions, we thought we'd ask, what have you seen work to drive behavior change, either your own or others? And we want you to use that question and answer box and just give us a short answer. Just type in, text a couple of things. What have you seen work to drive behavior? Some of the things, and maybe it's something that you've done yourself, or maybe it's something that's hopefully been maybe not done to you. We hear that sometimes, how change is done to people. But let's see, what are some ideas? Oh, okay, great. Leading by example. Ooh, I think we're going to talk about that. Coaching, explaining. Wow, it's coming in so fast, I cannot even read them all. Consistency, changing a policy, kind of solidifying it, upper management buying in. When there's excitement built around the change. Positive reinforcement, another good theme here. Let's see, asking questions, not offering an alternative. Promotional opportunity, kind of some incentive for people. interactive and inspiring training with a dynamic presenter. Hopefully we're doing a little bit of that today. I know we're remote, but we're trying. Top-down behavior modeling, asking employees what they need, getting their suggestions, communicating, sharing information at all levels, motivating people, interacting, including others in the development of these policies. These are great.
I mean, do you think they should be doing this webinar?
Well, I think we've got the right audience for sure. So you've already hit upon many of the themes that we're going to be talking about and sharing some good solutions with. So, Andy, we're going to let you take it away.
Okay, you bet. So, greetings, everybody. So Rob mentioned this is harkening back to the Stanford study, and that they reached out to the psychology department, and one of the things that they brought to the table was a theory at the time called the social learning theory, now called cognitive learning theory. And what that posits is that there are four obstacles, four barriers to skill acquisition or behavior change. And those are, as you see on the slide there, are conceptual, and that is that you can understand the skill and the reason for it. Okay, so that you now have an awareness of it and why it exists. But just because you understand a skill, does that mean that you're going to be able to perform the skill or use the skill? So that's what the behavioral has to do with. But just because you can do or perform the skill, does that mean that you want to do it, that you're motivated to do it? And toward that end, that you would need to see positive outcomes from using the skill. Okay, so do you want to do that? And finally, the attentional, or we like to call it the cueing. Do you see the opportunity to use the skill? You might right after the training or during the training, but it can quickly fall away, and then you don't see the opportunity. So what we're going to do is kind of break down each one of these barriers to skill acquisition, and talk about some tips and strategies of how we overcome them. All right. So with the first, with conceptual, so we're talking about teaching skills here, especially with human interaction skills. One of the things that's critical is that we discuss the context. Well, when is it appropriate to use the skill? When is it not appropriate to use the skill? Do we always use these human interaction skills regardless of the situation? So what's the context? One of the simple skills that Rob was talking about in human interaction skills is a skill, let's say it's ask for ideas. So you need to understand that skill and then talk about the surrounding context of that. It might be great to ask for ideas and get employee involvement and engagement and get their feedback on how to proceed with a solution or a project. And so it might be a great opportunity to do that. On the flip side, when might it not be such a great idea to ask for ideas? It's not always going to be that you need to ask for ideas. What if you already have your mind made up? You already have the decision made. The policy dictates that you go in one direction. So asking for ideas, while you might understand the skill, you need to understand the context, when it's appropriate and when it's not. It needs to be a diagnostic situation, especially with humans. Okay. Also, to understand a human interaction skill specifically, it's important to be able to see the skill in action. And along those lines, a powerful mechanism to do that is the utilization of videos. And that's not long videos. We're not showing movies. These are short vignettes that somewhat frame a skill. Here's what the skill is. Here's what it's not. Here's how to do it. Here's how not to do it. And with video, with showing human interaction skills with video, what you're able to do more than any discussion is you're able to see a lot of the nonverbal stuff that's going on while communicating. And as you all likely know, more of the message is sent non-verbally than through what you're actually saying. So video is able to capture that with short vignettes of right ways and wrong ways, and framing what it is that the specific skill is that we're talking about. So once you overcome the conceptual, then we suggest, or that's one barrier to overcome, is the conceptual barrier.
Well, we thought it would be kind of fun to ask the audience and get a sense from you all, how many of you are using video in your training program? Julie's going to launch a poll here for us. It's going to appear on your screen.
Poll is open, so feel free to just select the one answer that best fits your organization. While people are answering rapidly, so we'll keep this going for probably the next 20 to 30 seconds, give people a chance to just finish up answering, and then we will share the results.
It's always fun to see the percentages.
Yeah.
We had to give them the, the not yet, but planning on it. So that's a very valid answer. Don't overlook that one.
And as Rob mentioned before, as we're talking here, it's like video by itself, the utilization of video alone, without addressing some of the other barriers to skill acquisition. It's not necessarily the magic bullet or the panacea that fixes all, but it is a powerful tool.
Okay, I think we've gotten all of the results, so let's close this and share the results. Survey says.
Okay, so we have, 63%. So good 2/3 of the group is already using video. That's excellent. 25% isn't, and we've got about 12% that are planning to soon. That's excellent. And one of the good things in your favor for those of you, all of you, those using it and those planning to and those not using it, is it's getting a lot more affordable. The technology is getting a lot easier for people to be able to incorporate video without spending, oodles and oodles of money. So that's a big plus. And we thought we'd share a little more of kind of the research and some statistics behind this. So those of you who maybe aren't there yet and need some data to help convince someone in your organization, I mean, the human brain is just really wired to retain information better if it's presented through images and videos. And you're probably seeing this in PowerPoints too, because I've seen a big change in the way PowerPoints are put together nowadays, much more image heavy. And so if you compare a retention rate of 10% for text versus 65% for images and 95% for videos, I mean, that's a big difference. And it kind of made me think about movie scenes. How a lot of times when you see a movie or you hear a movie quote, it sticks with you for years. And some people are better at this than others, but even myself, I find somehow that video clip, there's something about it that it sticks in my brain when other information doesn't. And it's a useless piece of information, the movie clip, but for some reason it sticks with me. So making something memorable by adding video dramatically increases the chance that it will be retained. There's kind of three elements to this: the image, the video having content, so there's something to be said. There's a symbol around it, that's the picture, the image, and that brings up some sort of emotion. And by emotion, I'm not talking about a deep emotional experience, but something that connects for you. So even in this silly little picture here about chocolate, you might connect better to this because you have a really good feeling about cooking a chocolate souffle, right? And this makes you think about that. Or maybe you're getting hungry for lunch and now you're going to include dessert with your lunch today. So that's what I mean by some sort of emotional piece. In training, this often occurs because we use humor to strike this chord. And in fact, in the education program that I talked about earlier, in many of the videos, we intentionally show the skill being done incorrectly. And it's often humorous because we're not experiencing it. It's not probably humorous if we're experiencing the skill, a bad action skill, but it's humorous when you watch it. And in that way, it becomes much more memorable.
Yeah.
So I want to transition into our next barrier, which is the behavioral barrier. And we're going to talk really about two elements here. And the first key element or factor is repetition. And we talked, amongst the three of us, we talked about this baseball example and decided that we really liked it because hitting a ball with a bat, swinging a bat in and of itself isn't very hard. Any of us can do that, but it is very hard to hit a pitch in a professional baseball game. In fact, I did a little bit of research on it. I'm more of a football person instead of a baseball person, so I did have to ask my husband. And he said the top batting averages are, in the 300 with like 400 is like nearly godlike in baseball. Hitting those top averages is going to take countless hours of practice. And that's what we're talking about here with repetition. The practice reinforces that skill. You have to practice it to really embed it into your habits, to make it a habit. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in his book, Outliers, the story of success. He talks about this concept of the 10,000-hour rule. And he claimed that the way to achieving world-class expertise in any skill, to a large extent, is a matter of practicing it the correct way. And he did all kinds of research with all different types of professions. And this consistent number of 10,000 hours of practice came out as a tipping point, which is another book he wrote, for when that practice turns into this acquired skill. So it takes a lot of practice.
And one of the things that the Stanford folks found too is that in many, many training programs, there will be practice, but the practice will be the nature of, let's say you've got 15 or 20 people in the room and you pull one person up in front of the room and you have that person practice. And then you pull another person up in front of the room and that person practices. What you lose with that, among other things that we're going to get to, but one of the big things you lose there is repetition. That person practicing just one time, that skill is not going to overcome the behavioral barrier.
Right. But you bring up a perfect point. So how do we build this into our programs? And we're going to ask a question to the group about role playing. I mean, how do you feel about role playing in general? Because this could be a way to build practice into your trainings. How do you feel about role play? Just use that question and answer box again. And just give us a word or two. Maybe you like role play, maybe you don't. When you're asked to role play, is there an emotion that immediately comes to mind? I know we've got some.
Oh boy, I can't wait to get up there.
We sometimes
Right.
And things like that. So tension, some hate doing it, but it's effective. Sometimes it can be frightening. Not a big fan, but lots of giggling. Sometimes it builds some good camaraderie. And some are saying they loved it. Yep, gives us a better comfort level. So maybe it's hard to get up initially, but then it becomes an experience that's valuable. Summer acting school.
That's good.
Let's make someone think about.
That's good.
So, oh my goodness. Oh, said rather go to the dentist. Kidding, sort of. Okay, well, that leads us nicely into the second factor we wanted to talk about here, which was informed feedback. And we wanted to almost suggest a better way of doing role playing, because you've said that we all have some feelings about that, but that generally speaking, it is an effective way of practicing. So what could we do to create an environment that is safer and also improves the role play experience? Because sometimes in a role play, we're novices. We're not exactly sure if we're doing it right. So how can we do those two things? And we want to suggest to you that if you group either in triads or in smaller groups, that this practice concept is going to be more comfortable and therefore more effective. So just creating an environment where it's not just, you know, two of you, you've got a little bit more people involved in it. You're not dragging someone up to the front of the room, like Rob said. The other important thing, though, is having someone in that triad or in that small group be the coach. And so what do I mean by that? So this particular person is someone who is going to be more informed about the skill. They're going to be given more information, specific instructions about the role play, so that they will be able to actually help coach others through it. I think that kind of the example we talked about was like almost acting like a flight simulator. So very specific scenario and very specific instructions, and that coach is informed enough so that if someone were to crash in the exercise, the coach is going to be able to give them the coaching and the expertise, the information that lets them be successful then on the next round. So this notion of having someone who can help others through the exercise. Rob, did you want to add something to that?
Well, yeah, so putting people into triads, that does help tremendously with the repetition. That is, if you've got 12 different situations and you've got people in triads, that gives each person 4 opportunities to practice the skills that are being taught that you're practicing at that time. So that's the good news with the triads. The problem side of the triads is, do you really have informed feedback? If you pull somebody up in front of the class and the person is interacting with the instructor who is an expert, well, now you've got informed feedback, but you don't have the repetition. So now you got people in triads, and now what could very easily be sacrificed now is the informed feedback. So that's where those practices have to be highly structured, so that one person in our terminology, we call it the initiator. That's the person who's practicing the skills. That person is just told the situation, but the respondent, the initiator is role playing with, is told exactly how to play it. And if the person uses the skill that you want, if the person asks for ideas, then you give an idea. If the person doesn't ask for ideas, then you say something, I don't know, we put a little quote in there, some little like, well, you've got it all figured out, so, you know, I mean, you say something kind of snotty, kind of a thing. That's one source of feedback, is that the respondent now has come back with something that the initiator goes, well, something misfired there. So that's one source of feedback. And then, as Melissa said, the coach is also given a lot of detail about what errors are likely to happen, so that coach then, at the end of the interaction, can give some feedback to that initiator. And then they go on to the next situation, et cetera, so they get through all 12 of them. But that gives everybody an opportunity to practice the skills 4 times. In my example of 12, that gives everybody a chance to do it 4 times. And yet there is informed feedback, because you've got 2 people, the respondent and the coach, each giving being alert to the common problems that are likely to happen.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next barrier, motivational. And Andy talked about what this basically is. And this is a really important one, because how do you get someone to care enough to do something different, to try a new skill? And we talked about in the very beginning, you know, how hard change is normally for people. And even when we have kind of what might be a strong motivation to lose weight or whatever, it's still difficult to adopt a new behavior. So I like this visual, because it shows kind of the overlap. This is the sweet spot you're trying to get to. What is it that we want to say organizationally or in our training program or culturally? What is it that we're trying to get to? And then what is it that the people, the staff, that they're interested in. Where is that magical spot where those interests align and completely overlap? Then we've got something to work with to be motivated about. And one of the things that I think helps in a work setting is finding that and naming the positive outcome. When I use this new skill, what happens? Oh, my relationships. When I address conflict in this way, it's so much easier to resolve, and I'm not nearly as anxious. When I ask others for their ideas, wow, they're more interested in talking with me. They're more engaged. They actually follow through with what we've agreed to. So
they're more committed to the idea that they came.
Right? This classic, cause and effect thing. So we need to tap into that. What is the outcome that makes it worthwhile, that makes someone really want to put this effort in? That's what we're looking for. And so one of the techniques to doing that is, and actually this is one of the skills that we teach in the resolution program, is sharing effects. So I've already kind of talked about the first effect, you. So when I deal with conflict this way, it's easier for me. I'm not, nearly as worried about talking with Rob because we've got a good relationship here. So I have this problem, but I'm not worried about talking with Rob because, we've been working on this relationship. But sometimes that's not enough. And so in those cases, to deal with resistance, you might need to go to effects on others. So maybe by somebody not performing something or not doing a behavior or not being a good organizational citizen, what effect is that having on other people in the organization? Because maybe I really care about my coworkers, and this is having a really detrimental effect on them and their morale. And I don't like that. Or maybe it has to even be broader. Maybe I really care about the customers and the organization. And I can see that the effect of us not doing this is really causing some discontent on their end. I know in the public sector it's not so much that we lose customers, but maybe those customers are being very vocal. Maybe this is now, coming to light in the newspaper or maybe at the city council meetings, and that's not good for my city. So by sharing those types of effects, sometimes we can get people on board.
More motivated to use the skill.
Motivated to use the skill. Yep. Exactly. And we often show this in the videos, so that's another way to kind of tie those two together. Yep. Mm-hmm. I also want to talk about the major difference to most of the trainings that we've seen, and this is absolutely key, taking a top-down approach. And this actually came out in the Q&A where people talked about having top management,
People were saying coaching.
Coaching, exactly, right? And having everybody bought in, having role models. This is exactly where this comes in. And what we're recommending here is that supervisors and managers are involved in doing the actual training. And I'm going to ask you a question. If your supervisor was training you, so the training course you were taking, your supervisor was actually up there as maybe a co-training with someone, and then after the training, they were following up with you and checking in with you on how you were doing and maybe how you had applied the skills. How likely do you think you are to at least try the new skill? And just give me a yes or a no. So imagine you're in a training class, your supervisor is doing the training, they're observing you in the class, and then after class they're following up with you. How likely do you think it is that you will at least try some of these new skills? Yes, more likely. Yes, exclamation. Love that. Highly likely, yes. Yep, okay, definitely, right? I mean, so I wanted to, it's kind of a rhetorical question, right? I admit that, but I wanted to kind of put that out there. If you think about it in those terms, this is a secret weapon. When you involve the managers and we're talking about from the executive level all the way down, they are becoming role models, and maybe they're reluctant role models, but by the end of the training, they are actually experts in it, because when you have to train something, those skills become really ingrained and you get really good at them. And then they themselves are more likely to use those skills. And now it builds an accountability that they're checking in with you. And so now you are more motivated to actually try those skills and good outcome using those skills. Now it becomes very reinforcing. It's a beautiful thing to get to higher levels of commitment. Plus, everyone is then on the same page. I can't tell you how many training classes where we've been working with supervisors and they say, oh, I wish my manager would be here to hear this. And, oh, this is all wonderful, but I get back to work and they say we can't do it this way. This takes care of that particular problem because everyone is on the same page.
And Melissa, another thing with the motivational, before the intentional, with this motivational, the way that we would do it, or the way that we do it, is that with the manager training, yes, but the manager also training over a period of weeks. So it's not just a one-day training where the manager stands up and does a little song and dance, but rather over a 6-week period, the manager at different at training sessions over those 6 weeks actually performs the training and then follows up with the participants in between the sessions. So if I'm the manager, I teach the skills along with the co-trainer, and then I follow up with the participants that are in my group that are actually my direct staff. I follow up with them and talk about motivational, and then they count those applications on a little cue card and such. But that is a definite motivator for people to engage in trying the skills.
Absolutely, and I think even if you're in maybe a smaller organization, just even having their top management come into whatever training sessions might be scheduled, just coming in and speaking a little bit to why that training is important and how that training fits into the overall mission and vision of the organization. Something even small like that would be a step along this road.
Has huge symbolic value.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so we've covered the first 3 barriers. And so imagine that you're engaged, you go to a 4-hour session. As Andy said, you could have a week between sessions so that people are actually have a week to practice skills. But so you go to a training session, and in that you understand clearly what the skill is and why you would want to use it. You are in role plays. You are actually practicing it so that you got that skill integrated so that you're using it when it's appropriate. You are clearly motivated. You see very important outcomes that will happen as a result of using it. And so then you go, taught you now, and you're now focused on the content of your job. And so for the next week, you're working on getting things turned around and all that. And then a week later, you go, oh, I got the training course to go. And you go, oh, man, I didn't practice. I was gonna practice, but I forgot. And really, it's the content of the job. There's nothing in any program, I would imagine, that says don't focus on the content of your job, just focus on these skills. What we're talking about is the Benson project. Turning that around is going to have enormous opportunities to practice the skills. You need to weave them together. So here's a way of looking at it, and you probably many of you are probably aware of this, but let me just run through it quickly here. Because it deals with the attentional, and it's really like 4 steps in order to having a skill that you're ready to use at any moment. Okay, the first step we call unconsciously incompetent. And I think of when I was a kid and I was first learning how to drive. And and my dad took me to an abandoned Safeway parking lot, and he and he put me behind the wheel, and I just had my learner's permit there, and he began to teach me how to do it. And it was a long, ugly story that in training I'll get into the ugliness of it. But basically, I almost ran into a light pole, and my dad, when after I screeched on the brakes, and my dad was picking his forehead off of the dashboard and glared back at me, and at that moment, I went. Actually, it didn't feel like a major achievement, but I went to the next step, which is I was now fully aware of my incompetence, right? I was now consciously incompetent. Now, then the rest of the afternoon, my dad continued to coach me. He didn't give up on me, thank God. And he continued to work with me. And pretty soon I was, driving on the highway, and I was able to, slow down into a curve and then accelerate out of the curve. I could do some of the more sophisticated kind of stuff. But the thing is, I couldn't be talking with my dad about the football game that afternoon or anything else. I was consciously competent. I could do it, but I could only do it while I was paying attention to it and really focused on it. Okay. Well, now I have a lot of friends who would probably contest that I've reached the 4th level, and that is unconsciously competent. But I got here today. I arrived at CPS. I didn't get into an accident. Nobody's injured. And I swear I did not think about driving when I got here. I was thinking about the webinar and thinking about, what we're doing. So here's something that I can promise people who are going through training. And that is 6 months from now, you are not going to be thinking about the use of these skills. Now, whether 6 months later you're at the 1st level or at the 4th level has everything to do with how much practice you get in the weeks between sessions, okay? So that's why that graphic on the right there, that's just, that takes our 16 skills and puts them into a framework. That's not the important part about this, but it's helpful when it comes to cueing you in the weeks between sessions. It's helpful to have something visual that will, whether it's a cue card, that we give everybody a cue card so that they can carry that around and put it up next to the phone or whatever, put it in their pocket, their vest pocket or whatever, and kind of carry it around as a visual reminder to use the skills. Cueing also, Andy just alluded to it a minute ago, that if your boss is following up in the weeks between sessions and asking you from time to time, have you had any opportunities to use the skills? And very often these bosses are telling us that people will say, oh, geez, no, I haven't had the opportunity, or, oh, I forgot, or whatever. And what we suggest that the boss do is to say, well, what do you have planned in the next hour? Well, I'm going to be meeting with Ben. While you're with Ben, actively look for an opportunity to ask Ben for an idea, or see if you can find an opportunity to give Ben a positive recognition. See if you can see if at the end of that conversation with Ben, you can have a very clear who does what by when to resolve the issue that you're talking with Ben about, etc. That cueing from the boss will go a long way. And then finally, Melissa has written competition there. What we're referring to there is that what we ask people to do on the cue cards is on the back of them, to every time they mindfully use the skill, whenever they're consciously competent, when they mindfully use the skill, just put a tick mark, because you can't put a tick mark if you haven't noticed you've used the skill, right? So put a tick mark there, and if you have multiple groups going through in the organization at the same time, you can gather how many. We ask people not to put their names on it or whatever, but submit how many they did, okay? And then you total that and divide it by the number of people in the group, and you can chart that on the wall, and you can have different groups that, the charts from different groups. And so you get a friendly competition. Obviously people can lie, so you can't make too big a deal of it, but people enjoy the competition and the fun of it. And it clearly gets people to start getting more what we call applications, mindful applications of the skills in the week between sessions. So that's what that competition is referring to.
And I love how these 4 that we're talking about really interrelate and reinforce each other. So I'm thinking about the competition piece. That might be a motivator
for some people.
But it's not for everyone. So just another piece. So whatever training you're doing, whatever initiative you're trying to put forth in your organizations. Think about how you can use visuals. What can you create? How can you cue people? There's another term, nudging, that is used a lot in training, where maybe a day or a week later, it's just a little reminder. What are the things that you can build in that will cue people? And then just a little bit of friendly competition keeps us all, I think, more on track. It's about that attention, right? That Benson project is competing for our attention. So how do we make sure we don't get sucked down? Let's integrate them, exactly. So then we're actually, it's not extra work. It's
use the skills to solve the Benson project problem.
I love it.
Right.
I love it. So what we're really talking about here is how all of this fits together, and we've been talking about really how it's implemented in addition to the different pieces. It's kind of funny to talk about all these different pieces, but they really fit together. They happen over time. This isn't training that's just a half day or even a 1 day type of an experience where it is very easy to lose that attention. It's hard to maintain that motivation, even if conceptually we learn it, we understand it that day. But if it's a short, one-time kind of event, it is much harder to become unconsciously competent.
Right.
We might be at the lower level of that ladder, but we really want to get to that higher level. So what we are suggesting is think about having your training programs extend over a period of time. And maybe they're a little shorter in duration, but then they come back at intervals. And within those intervals, there is support designed into it, support and reinforcement, because the manager, the supervisor, the executive, they are involved in it. They are modeling that behavior, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom and between sessions. And they're actively asking for people's experience with the skill, creating that safe environment. Tell them how it went. Oh, it could have gone better. Let's talk about that. You really interweaving, is that a word? Interwoven, putting all of these elements together. So over time, with the managers involved, lots and lots of practice. That's going to get you much, much closer to a successful implementation.
And to me, the key of the implementation is that when managers are training, a lot of managers have never trained a day in their lives before, right?
Yeah.
So it's got to be a successful experience. When they're up there training, they've got to be feeling good about it. So that's the consultant trainer's responsibility, is to prepare them for the training and to make sure that they have a successful experience, because they're training their people who look to them as the leader. And if they don't look good while they're up there, now you're hurting their career, not helping their career. Right. So everything has to be focused on making sure that every leader trainer who's standing up there training has a successful experience. As I say, that's the consultant trainer's responsibility.
Yes, what Rob is alluding to is a method that we use where we team up maybe the manager or the supervisor with a trainer who is more of an expert in the area. And this is something that we do in our resolution skills program, but we're also suggesting that it's something that you might think about doing in your organization, because you have subject matter experts in your organization. So utilize them with that manager supervisor is going to greatly increase the success of the program.
Yep.
So we've talked about a lot of different things that we hope you can consider. If you want a deeper dive into the specifics of the resolution program, we are holding a 3-day course in April on that. But I think at this time, are we going to turn it over to questions?
We do have a few minutes left for some of the questions that have come in. So let's do that. First question is, how do you affect change when the primary culture border on unethical and retaliatory from management?
Ooh. But I think the top-down
Top-down,
implementation,
right.
Go ahead.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The CEO or whoever the leader, I say CEO, but it's really the top of any pyramid, right? If that's the organization, that person needs to weave the importance of ethics into the training. It needs to be tailored for that organization so that it deals with that, and then it flows from top down, creating a change.
That's a great answer. Okay, so let's move on to the next question that we've received, which is, some on this project do not understand or feel OCM is needed on this project. If it could be addressed in discussion, that would be wonderful. Wanting to know about the pros, the cons, the impact on a large, complex state agile project.
Okay, so I think what we're talking about here is that resistance. OCM is, I think, organizational change management. So that resistance to a change, and that's where you have to kind of go back to those 4 barriers. How are you addressing those 4 barriers? Conceptually, do people understand why the change is needed and what is needed of them? Behaviorally, can they practice now this new behavior in a way that's safe, where they feel supported? Do they see the motivation of it? I mean, do they see what's going to be better? What's the outcome?
What's the positive outcome?
What's the positive outcome? And then lastly, attentional. I mean, do they have the time and the ability? Do we have the cues? Do we have, again, I would say support and reinforcement to keep their attention on that new skill or that new change? So hopefully all 4 of those things we talked about give you ideas to get that buy-in.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. The next question asks, what are some key indicators to determine readiness for change? And do you recommend surveys, pre or post training, or both?
See, so when people say readiness for change, I think of it as two different things. There's readiness to acquire these skills, which that has to do with top management commitment, in my opinion. But then there's other change, like if you want to implement total quality management or a quality management system in your organization, or some kind of big change like that, getting the human interaction skills first will make that follow-on change infinitely better. But it takes a while to get the culture change first. But once you've done that, now you've got an organization that is much more ready for change, because the human side is got people bonded around the human interaction skills.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think some of the readiness factors are looking at, again, the things that we've talked about. When you ask people conceptually where they're at, are they all over the board? Well, you're probably going to have a problem with readiness there. I mean, so thinking about what is your communication plan to then get that taken care of, and then just keep kind of going down the list. Test it, and ask people, and then start putting things in place to move them closer to that readiness.
Those are good points. So the next question that we have is, how do you foster a culture of trust and respect in a political environment?
To the extent that it weaves into this, it has to do, I think, with one of the main skills. The bottom line skill is who does what by when, and trust happens when who does what by when, agreement between 2 people, and then they actually follow through. So we have the final skill that's on our methodology anyway, is a review date and time. And that is that you have a who does what by when, and then you calendar some review time. And when people actually show up for that review date and time, and they've met the commitments, now you're fostering an organization of trust. And I don't care whether it's a political organization or any other kind of organization. That's what's going to foster trust.
I would add to that, it's this notion where everyone is on the same page. So I think a lot of times trust is low because we maybe question the motive. right? Or
That's a good point.
and we don't really understand, is this good for me? Is it only good for them? And there's lots of reasons why we might feel that way. So how can we then ensure that management across the board is all on the same page and is all able to speak to how does this help everyone in the entire organization? It's not
everybody is concerned about everybody else's interests.
Yeah.
Maybe not all their wants, but their needs.
That's right. And what we do in that resolution program is in our first module, we really get people focused on the vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really a galvanizing way to kind of build trust in an organization. If the management, again, all management, and then they can impart to everyone in the organization the work that they're doing is moving forward with our vision, that really helps. So there has to be follow through, because where we run into problems is when there's no walking of the talk. And that's,
Right.
again, kind of, let's demonstrate good human interaction skills in a positive culture that will help start to turn the corner.
Okay, well, I thank you very much. We are at time now, so I want to thank you, Melissa, Rob, and Andy, for a great presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. I want to remind you that we will send an email with a link to the recording and the slide deck from today's webinar. Thank you and have a great day.